Welcome back, everyone. This video will be about the expulsion of the other, society, perception, and communication today. Book written by Byung-Chul Han, translated to English by Wieland Hoban. Wieland Hoban is a translator and also a musician, composer. He has he has translated works by Theodore Adorno, Peter Sloterdijk, Alain Badiou, and many others. This book, The Expulsion of the Other, was published by Polity in 2018. And it's the 9th book by Han that I'm reading. It's, at the same time, a nice extension of his other works, The Burnout Society, Agony of Eros, Psychopolitics. Good, useful elaboration of the themes explored in those works. And at the same time, it is unique enough in the way it pays attention to its central topic that is worth thinking through, reading and discussing. I'll begin just reading the chapter titles first. So there are 12 chapters in the book. As usual, 12 relatively short chapters, beginning with the terror of the same, the violence of the global and terrorism, the terror of authenticity, anxiety, thresholds, alienation, counterbody, gaze, voice, the language of the other, the thinking of the other, and the final chapter is called listening. So, beginning with the terror of the same. Roughly, if I were to simplify the central argument of the book, it's about the opposition between two tendencies or two kinds of logic. One, the logic of the same, the imposition of the same, the hegemony of the same, and the other tendency that regards the other. So the same is being, the logic of the same is being criticized, where the tendency to assimilate everything into one and the same worldview, one and the same frame of mind that excludes what doesn't fit in it. Expels what doesn't fit in it. And one way to exclude that doesn't look like excluding is when we misrepresent something that we are apparently including, but we are including an image of it, a judgment of it, that is effectively a way of excluding it. You might remember there's an old interview, I think, by Slavoj Žižek, in which Žižek says, I'm very popular, I'm famous and popular, but I'm popular for being a funny philosopher, a funny speaker, and making a lot of dirty jokes. And my image as a clown is a way of repressing me, is a way of dismissing me. So that's a really good example of how a way of representing someone, despite their popularity, can be a way of excluding them from serious conversation, from serious engagement. So I'm going to read just a few passages from the book, and maybe add some comments of my own. And at the end of the video, I am going to respond to two questions from you, two comments on my previous videos on Han. Two different Han books, one Psychopolitics, the other one, The Scent of Time. So thank you very much for those comments, for everybody who commented and engaged with the previous videos. But there are two comments that I'm going to respond to at the end of the video. Okay, let's read. From the first chapter, The Terror of the Same. I'm going to occasionally rearrange the passages, and I'm going to jump from one passage to another passage just to be more selective. So this passage is about experience, what experience is, and the fact that genuine experience, real experience, is always about something other. So I'm reading. To have an experience of something means that this something befalls us, strikes us, comes over us, overwhelms and transforms us. The negativity of the other and of transformation is what constitutes experience in an emphatic sense. This view of experience, by the way, I'm not reading anymore, I'm just talking. This is a comment. This view of experience, this way of paying attention to experience, the structure of experience, the essential encountering feature of experience with something transformative, was picked up by people like Gadamer. And philosophical hermeneutics is very attentive to this way of thinking about experience. Okay, going back to the text. The proliferation of the same with capital S, the proliferation of the same presents itself as growth. At a certain point, however, production is no longer productive, but destructive. Information is no longer informative, but deformative. It deforms. And communication is no longer communicative, but merely cumulative. I'm going to jump and include a couple of passages, just one passage from chapter 5, which is titled Thresholds here, because it's relevant to what I just read. The compulsion to accelerate the global circulation of capital, communication, and information breaks thresholds down and results in a threshold-less smooth space with an extremely accelerated internal rotation. This is where a new anxiety develops, an anxiety that is completely disconnected from the negativity of the other. It's the anxiety of excess, not being able to stop. And this is the anxiety that is characteristic of binge watching or binge eating. And Han talks about binge eating and binge watching in this book and in other works. Back to chapter 1. We read, the terror of the same affects all areas of life. One travels everywhere, yet does not experience anything. One catches sight of everything, yet reaches no insight. One accumulates information and data, yet does not attain knowledge. One lusts after adventures and stimulation, but always remains the same. One accumulates online friends and followers, yet never encounters another person. Okay, now moving to the chapter titled The Violence of the Global and Terrorism. He writes, hospitality is the highest expression of a universal reason, universal human reason that has come into its own. So globalism doesn't really result in hospitality. I'm not reading now. I have to say when I'm quoting and when I'm not. I'm not quoting right now. Globalism doesn't result in hospitality. That's why it's not synonymous with progress in civilization, especially because it can be combined with high degrees of xenophobia, hatred of other people. How civilized society, back to reading Han, this is a quote. How civilized society is can be judged by its hospitality in particular. Indeed, its friendliness. Xenophobia is hatred and ugly. It is an expression of a lack of universal reason, a sign that society is still in an unreconciled state. Let me read that sentence one more time. Hospitality is the highest expression of a universal reason that has come into its own. Okay, jumping to chapter called The Language of the Other. How to move. This chapter most directly, I guess, engages with moving against, how to move against the imposition of the same. And the answer, one answer is poetry, literature, literary imagination. So we read, poetic imagining, literary imagination, works the foreign into the same, like a good host. Art and philosophy are obliged to reverse the betrayal of the foreign, of that which is different from subjective spirit. This means liberating the other from the categorical web of subjective spirit, restoring to it its strange, wondrous other, giving it its due. Poetry, according to Salan, shows a strong tendency towards silence. The noise of communication makes it impossible to listen. Poetry shows a strong tendency towards silence, the listening silence. The final chapter is listening, called Listening. I found it extremely beautiful and moving. In this chapter, Han quotes Elias Kennedy. Elias Kennedy Kennedy has a 3-volume memoir or autobiography, I guess memoir. And in one of those, the 3rd volume, he talks about several, characters, literary characters, figures, including Herman Brock. And he talks about Herman Brock, how great of a listener he was in his experience. Herman Brock is somebody that Milan Kundera also talks about in his essays in The Art of the Novel. So now, this is a quote from Elias Kennedy about Herman Brock, included in this book by Byung-Chul Han. It's a description of having a conversation with Brock and the quality of that conversation being with a person who is such a great listener, and you don't have to stop with them. You don't have to tell yourself that that's it, this is the limit, you have to stop here. While in other such conversations, there comes a point where one suddenly says to oneself, stop, this far and no further, where one senses the danger of relinquishing too much. For how does one find the way back to oneself? And how after that can one bear to be alone? With Brock, there was never such a point or such a moment. One never came up against warning signs. One staggered on, faster and faster, as though drunk. It is devastating to discover how much one has to say about oneself. The further one ventures, the more one loses oneself. The faster the words flow. That was Elias Kennedy, quoted by Byung-Chul Han. Going to the 2 questions that I promised I will be responding to. One question is part of a comment on my video about psychopolitics. And the person asks, why? How? What is the process of us coming into an agreement with Han? Why do we think that what Han says is true? This is really a wonderful question. Because Han doesn't give us an argument. He makes claims, and his statements have the character of a person observing not just the surface, but also going beneath the surface and then coming back on the surface and going beneath the surface. But he's not empirical in the sense that we usually understand that word. The consequence of that is, if we come to an agreement with him, it's because we are allowing him to rely on our experiences. We let his words, his translated words in my case, we let his words find contact with the material of our lives, to see if there can be a conversation or there can be a resonance between how I see the world, how I see my life, the material of my life, that is not necessarily formed within language yet, but it starts to be formed or take some kind of form with the help of writers like Byung-Chul Han. What he writes, in other words, cannot stand on its own. It requires our participation in a way that is maybe a little bit more than some other writers, because he's so concise and so brief. I said that this is the 9th book that I'm reading by him, but this process of reading 9 very short books, very short, they're not big books, but it has been almost 2 years since I've started reading his work. 2 years. 2 years, 9 very slim books. Of course, I'm reading a few other books too. I'm doing other things during these 2 years, but I can't imagine reading any faster than this, because of the way he needs to be, or his texts need to be read in a way that goes back and forth between your experiences, the material of your life, and what he's offering. And to me, that's a very slow process. And we don't always, I mean, I don't always agree with him. I don't agree with him because there's much more structure in what he's writing about than what I find in the material of my life. Anyways, this binary opposition that he usually relies on, it's a good starting point, but you go beyond that. We need to go beyond that when we say, okay, you're either hospitable or you're not hospitable. Once we accept that, then we say, okay, fine. Being hospitable, being welcoming, friendliness, these are important. Let's talk now about the qualities of being hospitable, finer distinctions, and how hospitability relies on not being hospitable. Moving on to the second comment. This was a comment on my video about the scent of time. So this person writes about Henri Bergson, and he writes that the idea of the atomization of time, its reduction to point instance, the cinematic metaphor, comes from Bergson. Okay, fair enough. Han talks a lot about ideas that originate from elsewhere, from other people. So his idea of time, maybe Bergson is the main guy for that discussion of time. When Byung-Chul Han talks about people being entrepreneurs of the self, this idea of entrepreneurship of the self and optimizing the self originates from Foucault, I believe. And in this book, when he talks about the other, the alterity, our approaches, different ways of approaching regarding the other, Emmanuel Levinas is recognized as the main person, among others. But Levinas is, somebody that you might hear when you talk to a friend about these books, like you should read Levinas. But to me, that's a question. Why do we care about where an idea originates, where an idea comes from? Do we care about the order, the sequence of when an idea shows up first? Or do we also care about the network of ideas, the context in which the idea of this way of thinking about time, recognizing that time is being atomized? What else is the author writing about? What else do they care about? The web of the argumentative web, with the web of concepts within which this one insight takes place. Original thinkers that are they offer richer treatment of subjects, topics. They have the quality that the web of the other things that they are doing makes any one thing that they're offering us richer. That's why they shouldn't be summarized. If we summarize them, we lose. And that's my attitude towards Han. I'm happy with how he treats time as one component among a larger philosophical project. I'm not as concerned about originality as long as I'm getting a broader view of culture, of our time, of the digital age, of the post-humanist kind of cultural movement. But what do you think about that? I mean, why is this important, that the idea comes from someone else? I'm not sure. Okay, if you've stayed with me this long, thank you very much for your attention. Check out my reading group. We are currently reading Scenes of Clerical Life by George Eliot. This beautiful set of stories. And the time that you're watching this video, we might be reading something else or about to start something else. So check out the schedule for my reading group if you're interested in joining a discussion community, philosophical discussion community. Otherwise, take care of yourselves, and I'll speak with you next time.